Welcome to the GOAT District. We got a special one. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon on the East Coast. It is 10 in the morning in beautiful Bend, Oregon, where Billy lives. So we're happy to have you back in the district, Billy. How you doing today?
Doing great. Just had a cup of coffee. Got the kids fed, and I'm ready to talk some football.
Caffeinated and ready to go. Excited for this one.
GOAT District, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text? That trash offer's the best? You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice, from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man, y'all know what to do. It's the... And I always be traded. And I always be traded. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.
So this has been an awesome week for the GOAT District. The other night we had Billy Wazowski and Chris Eibel, two NFFC Hall of Famers, on for a high-stakes roundtable where we specifically looked at NFFC ADP. We predicted the ADP, and then we gave our own rankings. Dan Williamson and I also took part in it. It was really, really a great process. I don't think it's ever too early to start ranking for next year. Billy, have you been starting on your ranks, or is it something that you just got together for the pod today?
No, just for the pod today. Just looked at early round one and some of the players we're going to be discussing. There's still a lot of football left in the season, although we're nearing the tail end of the fantasy season. A lot can happen between now and the Super Bowl, as we know, that can drastically affect ADP. Someone who's maybe been hot during the season who cools off during the playoffs and leaves a bad taste in people's mouths, and then that ADP will adjust. And then as news kind of comes out in the season and the draft happens, there's just so many variables, in my opinion, that affects projections and first and foremost, which in turn affects average draft position. And I think that we have yet to get there to be able to kind of have a firm belief of the top 12. I think we can estimate a good portion of it, but I still think that there's a lot of surprises left that may affect it.
No, I agree with you. And I do think that there's something to be said with, should we be reacting to this part of the season, the very tail end and the playoffs? I think sometimes those can weigh too heavily in terms of where guys go ADP wise. I think Gabe Davis is an interesting test piece, because I think that huge game was part of it, was part of the steam that we saw this past offseason. I know he had the massive opportunity in front of him. We anticipated a higher target share and all that sort of thing, but I do think it was him what he did in the playoffs. Would you agree that maybe a guy like DK Metcalf to end his rookie year to kind of show what he could do, or Gabe Davis, in the playoffs last year, kind of swayed ADP?
Yeah, and then in contrary, you look at like Diggs had a down year last year by his standards, and there was a time when we did the hardware draft where I got him in the late second round. So thanks, Eddie.
It's a cameo.
So I got him in the late second round in the beginning, and that was like March or February whenever we did that draft. So it just shows you like the impact in people's minds and in recent biases that they have in players and how they perform down the stretch.
No, for sure. Now, Billy, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you these days? I know you're dropping your ranks. What day of the week are you dropping your ranks?
So I'll run my first run today, Thursdays. Just posted kind of the preliminary to the site over at Full Time Fantasy. it's a challenging week because you have most of the games on Saturday. You have a few games on Sunday. Rankings usually lock on Sunday morning. That gives you all that extra time for news. It's usually 10 a.m. Pacific time, so 1 a.m. Eastern is when normally the rankings lock for the contest at Fantasy Pros. But this week they're locking Saturday because the majority of the games are on Saturday. I'll get the Thursday night football posted tonight. I only do Thursday night football and then kind of adjust some players around there as well. Just that might affect the overall rankings of the players I'm ranking for Thursday Night Football. And then I take another deep dive on typically Saturday night, but this week it'll be Friday night. And
Saturday night might be a little bit busy in the Muzio household as well, I'd imagine, with the holiday.
Yeah, oh yeah, we got Christmas around the corner, and Santa's got to build a couple go-karts. So
that's it's always a tough putt when Santa needs to put stuff together. Been there, done that. That's a tough one. Speaking of Thursday nights, I'm on Long Island now. The weather is fine, but it's going to start getting bad pretty soon. It's going to be a lot of rain. The temperature is going to drop. We're pretty much going to get soaked for tonight's game into tomorrow. How are you handling the Thursday night start sits? I know Trevor Lawrence is coming off a top 5 quarterback performance. Garrett Wilson has been a mainstay in people's offenses. You obviously have Christian Kirk and Zay Jones on the Jacksonville side. One's potentially going to see some Sauce Gardner tonight. So there's a lot of variables here in terms of start sits. Is this a game to avoid? How are you handling this Thursday night game with the weather?
I'm avoiding a lot of it, to be honest with you. One, it's just a tough matchup. I mean, the Jets, and this is regardless of weather, but we'll talk about weather here in a second. But the Jets in general are just tough. I mean, they're one of the better defenses in the NFL this year. Sauce Gardner has been a true shutdown corner, and so you have that aspect of the game that's going to be affecting Trevor Lawrence. And I know it's hard to say, hey, I'd be looking elsewhere. When you look at the last few weeks that Trevor Lawrence has had, I mean, he was quarterback 5 last week versus Dallas. He was quarterback 1 versus Tennessee. Detroit, he had a down week in comparison to what he should have played as quarterback 16. And then the week prior to that, week 12 against Baltimore, again, top five outings. So he's had 3 top 5 outings in his last 4 weeks, but I think that fantasy managers are going to be disappointed in his fantasy production come tonight if they're expecting him to put up a good game, because this weather is going to affect the game. We're going to have significant wind. We're going to have heavy rain. They're expecting an inch during the game alone. So I mean that's you're going to have a wet field. You're going to have wind gusting, and it's not like it's a headwind or a tailwind. It's actually supposed to be a crosswind. And for those who are unfamiliar with winds, crosswind is actually coming across the field instead of, like, if you're throwing directly into the wind, it's just slowing down the ball, or if you're throwing from the wind behind you with a tailwind, it's actually accelerating the ball. But in this scenario, it's actually coming across the field, and it's going to affect the trajectory of the ball with gusts up to 37 miles an hour up to quarter 4. So the wind is supposed to stay all game. The rain is supposed to stay all game. And then on top of it, you have an outstanding Jets defense. I think that Trevor Lawrence owners might be disappointed tonight.
Yeah, and I do think that it's easier said than done in terms of being able to bench, these wide receivers like Garrett Wilson and Christian Kirk that are kind of mainstays. Are you just significantly downgrading them, or would you be looking to pivot off?
I'm actually pivoting off, and in some big money leagues. Dave and I, Hubbard in the High Society League over at FFPC, it's a $10,000 league. We're in the final 4 in both of them. In one of them, we have Trevor Lawrence, and we're actually benching Lawrence tonight for Nick Foles. So there is, some may consider it a gamble. Thank you, kiddos. Can you close the door, please? Some may consider it a gamble, or maybe you think that we're overthinking it. But I look back and say, one, that the weather.
Billy's having technical difficulties for a moment. He'll be right back.
Yeah. Okay. Now that that's settled, we have. She wanted to bring me a coffee. Thank you, honey.
That was nice of her. Very nice.
So as I was saying, is that Foles has definitely had the games in order to be stream worthy. Two, he gets to play in a dome this week, which domes in this week are going to be a hot commodity because of the weather across the U.S. And overall, I think that just this game tonight with Trevor Lawrence, I think that his the defense and the weather combined, I just think that you're going to have better options elsewhere. I would not be surprised if Trevor Lawrence finished as like quarterback 18 through 22, quite frankly.
Yeah, that's there's a couple of my teams where I'm looking to pivot. We are Dan, Andrew, and I. We have a 3K varsity going tonight. Big week for us. We're third, so the pay structure is like if you get to second, you've made a decent amount. You get to first, you made a very good amount. Third, you're still doing okay, but you need points. We're gonna go with Garrett Wilson, I think. We might pivot off. You've got me a little more apprehensive here, Billy. Would you go Garrett Wilson or Brandon Ayuk?
Oh man, Ayuk hasn't had the chemistry of Purdy that I've really wanted to see. They've talked about connecting more. I'd probably still go Garrett Wilson in that aspect.
Yeah, that's where we're at.
But I'm not comfortable with it. But Wilson is just having an outstanding rookie year, almost at 1,000 yards already, and has come on hot as of late. And I think they've realized they need to get him the ball. So Jacksonville is exploitable in the secondary, so I'd still lean that route because Ayuk has definitely cooled off with Purdy.
Yeah, that's kind of where we're at. And then Greg the Leg, I had a couple teams, and he's getting the bench. It's difficult to use kickers. I think that it's a lot of times it's difficult to pivot off of some of these guys like Garrett Wilson. If you have a good option, go for it. But kickers, you can always pivot off. And I think that, like Billy said, looking for a Dicker the kicker or Chase McLaughlin, you don't have to worry about the weather. I know Jason Sanders, I pivoted to him in multiple leagues because he's going to be playing in Miami this week. So having a kicker in bad weather, not only can the game flow be bad, but also you have, weird wind can affect all sorts of kicks. It can also affect teams' willingness to go for field goals, which it can be, just crushing when you need those extra kicker points, especially in these money weeks.
Yeah, and cold weather affects the football. I mean, it'll actually decrease the air pressure in the ball, which will result in reduced kicking distance. So, Greg the Leg is not known for his accuracy, but more for his distance. And if you are losing distance because of cold weather, it definitely affects his kicking.
They definitely don't call him Greg the Accurate.
Yeah.
So anyway, in terms of this week, this is a week where I talked about it the other day on the OG Live Wire about how I think sometimes people need to take a step back and be willing to bench guys that are perceived studs. You don't want to go down swinging with a big name that's in a bad spot. You brought up Trevor Lawrence this week. He's obviously been playing fantastic. You don't like the circumstances. You guys are pivoting, playing for big money there. You brought up Nick Foles. Is that one of your sneaky starts this week?
Nick Foles is a sneaky start. I like Nick Foles this week. I also like Gardner Minshew, but let's start with Minshew because of the Hurts news, just because everyone is scrambling. And if you're in a home league, congratulations, you can pivot. But if you're like us in high stakes, you're either running with naked Hurts or you probably had another quarterback in the name of like Mike White or even Kyler Murray or something. I've seen people who have 3 quarterbacks on their roster and have nobody to start this week because of all the quarterback fiascos that we've had. But
I'll give a quick hat tip to one of my drafting partners, Nelson Sousa, who you also know, on the New York Super Team, the very last waiver wire run, we pivoted to Gardner Minshew as our QB2. So we're all, basically texting each other how great the Jalen Hurts game is going, and then the following morning, it's like I'm glad we have Minshew. I'm not glad I need to start Minshew over Hurts, but I'm kind of with you. I'm pretty excited about him this week.
Yeah, I like Minshew, and I was hoping to get him in the 1K Dynasty League that we're in together. Everyone
got blocked, Billy.
Everyone blocked me on quarterbacks. Yeah. Frank added 5 quarterbacks. I'm glad Adam didn't notice waivers were going on apparently, and he could have added 2 or 3 and really left me struggling. That being said, I think I'm rolling out with Andy Dalton this week in that league. But back to Gardner Minshew, he's been sneaky good in my opinion, and quite frankly, I think he probably should be a starting quarterback in the NFL. He's just, he's been on a team that just hasn't needed one. But 2019, 12 games that he started, he threw for 3,271 yards. He had 21 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. It was a 60.6% completion percentage. Then moving on to 2020, 8 games, he threw for 2,500 yards, 16 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 66.1% completion percentage. And then 2 games last year, he had 439 yards and 1 touchdown. That's a 41-12 INT ratio, which is a 4.76 touchdown rate, which in comparison to 2020, that's top 16. In comparison to 2021, that's top 13 in touchdown rate. So we know that he's going to be a decent streaming option. Now, all this was done without the weapons that they currently have. You look at the team now, of course, they have A.J. Brown, who's just, exploded life into this offense. They have Devonta Smith, who has come on very hot as of late as A.J. Brown takes on more coverage. And then they have, of course, Goddard, who he has actually played with, and Goddard has had one of his career games with Minshew in at helm. So gotta love the weapons that he has. I mean, not to mention the running back duo that he has, and in particular with Miles Sanders. But gotta love the weapons he has. The matchup is a little tough. It's of course a interdivision game as well. But I think overall he has the weapons to succeed, and he has the ability to succeed. And I love Gardner Minshew as a streaming option this week.
Yeah, Dallas has been a little bit beat up defensively. I think you brought up Trevor Lawrence with the top 5 performance. That's the Dallas defense still can wreak havoc, but this is one of the best offensive line situations Minshew's ever had, and like you said, it's the best weapons he's ever had. I mean, you think about his time in Jacksonville. I mean, he certainly didn't have an A.J. Brown, so. I would put him, not sure where you're going to have him in your ranks, but I would say he's going to be a high end QB2 for me. I'd have him somewhere around QB 15, QB 14, somewhere around there sounds pretty good. Obviously it's a downgrade from Hurts, but you're not dead in the water with Minshew teams.
Yeah, as of right now, ECR at Fantasy Pros is 17. But I think you're right. I think he'll probably, in my rankings, he'll probably be in that 14-15 range. I'm going to have him ahead of Trevor Lawrence this week. I haven't moved Trevor Lawrence fully down yet. I had him down 3 spots in the early rankings, and he'll probably end up being around 15 or 16. So I'll probably have Minshew and Lawrence probably back-to-back in rankings.
Yeah, so my sneaky start for this week is Tyler Algier. He's coming off of a massive game this past week at 139 yards rushing on 17 carries. He broke off the long one. He had a touchdown. I like his matchup. It's going to be bad weather in Baltimore. I think they're going to need to lean on the running game, and Algier has the juice. I don't think it's sneaky to say that a guy, with 139 yards rushing is going to be in my lineup, but I don't think that the rankings are ranking him correctly. I think, I'm seeing him as like a low-end RB3. I would have him as like a high-end RB3 and a guy that I'm trying to cram into my lineups. It's 2 games left in fantasy. I like kind of riding that hot hand, and he's had over 52 yards rushing now for 4 straight games, including this outburst this past week. What are your thoughts on Tyler Algier this week?
Yeah, I think Algier has a decent week this week. I'm actually talking about him tonight on my podcast with Jody. He's going to be one of the players that we're discussing because of the recent streak he's had, Patterson being a little banged up, and them probably wanting to just see what they have more inside the rookie as well as the season unwinds for Atlanta. So I think that Algier has a pretty decent game. I'm about +5 versus ECR in rankings right now. I think his ECR was running back 39, somewhere around there. And I can actually, let me just do a quick look real quick. His ECR is actually, so he was 39. I moved him up to 34. So I have him like right behind Brian Robinson and Cam Akers this week, and ahead of Patterson and Zach Moss and Deion Jackson.
I have him head-to-head in a start-sit with Hollywood Brown in a kind of a bad situation where it's kind of like, 3 weeks ago, I would have kind of laughed at myself for this start-sit decision. Which way would you go with Hollywood Brown versus Tyler Algier this week?
It's tough because you have Tracy McSorley starting this week.
It's a mess.
Which is kind of a mess. Usually inexperienced quarterbacks lean on their wide receiver 1 and just give him a chance to catch the ball, it's going to be DeAndre Hopkins. They typically lean on the passing game and the running game as well, in the slot and in the flats, and anything across the middle of the field, which is going to be the tight end. I'd probably say Hollywood Brown is going to be the sit, in my opinion, based upon volume that Algier has seen. I know it's kind of ugly, and typically it goes against my philosophy that, Dave has kind of pounded in my head is never start a part-time running back over a full-time receiver. But I think that in this scenario, it warrants at least a consideration.
Yeah, it's a tough one either way. I feel like it's almost you're almost playing the higher floor, because I think with McSorley that offense could just go completely south. And a guy like McSorley, I would think that he's going to target DeAndre Hopkins, and the quality of the target's going to go down as well. So I don't want to have my fantasy life depending on Trace McSorley in any way. And I think Tyler Algier, like you said, I think Atlanta would have a lot of goodwill to end the season well with Algier and London alongside Ritter, maybe get a little bit of momentum for next year. Wanted to kind of move on here to some polarizing ADPs. I know we're going to talk about our rankings for 2023. There's a few guys that I think kind of stood out to me that are kind of difficult to rank at this point. And it's also a little difficult for me to anticipate how the market's going to rank them. Because I think there's two things here: giving our own ranks, but then also kind of predicting the ADP to give you an idea of kind of where you're at versus the market, which guys you're going to have to reach for. It all kind of goes hand in hand. The one that really stands out to me the most right now and where they're going to go in these early drafts is Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs is RB2 overall. He's had an unbelievable year. I mean, it's just wild. I mean, me and you saw drafts where he was going in the 8th round.
I passed on him the 9th in a couple.
Some in the 9th. I mean, I think he was in some of those late drafts. He was just living in the 8th. I had a FFPC main event team where I stacked Raiders, and I didn't add Josh Jacobs. It was a Raiders stack with Renfro and Adams and Carr, and I felt pretty good about it. If I would have just gone Josh Jacobs there, that team would have had a lot more life. It's a wild situation because he's 25 years old, and he's had a dominant season. We've seen his receiving ability go up the last 2 seasons. I mean, there's less. That used to be kind of the old take on him, is he's not a receiving back. That's kind of gone out the window. He can win in different ways. How do you anticipate the market values Josh Jacobs, and kind of where do you have him?
I think the market's going to overreact, and he's going to probably be in the tail end of round 1. I'd probably estimate somewhere between 1.10 and probably 2.2, around that area, kind of that Derrick Henry range where he was going at the tail end of the year. I don't like it. I mean, he's seen 75% of snaps. He's just been ran into the ground. He's going to be a free agent, so landing spot is going to determine his ADP. If he lands somewhere,
let's say for this case, let's say he returns to Josh McDaniels, he returns to the Las Vegas Raiders.
Yeah, I mean, that might change things a little bit in terms of my perception of him, because if they're going to continue to use him on 75 to 80% of the snaps and give him the ball 30 times a game, I'd be a little bit more interested in him. I won't pass on him in the 8th anymore, but I'm not paying around 1 or around 2 for him, just because I don't think that he's going to see that type of volume next year, because if they do re-sign him, now they have to protect their asset, and they're not going to be giving him the ball that much because now they have injury to be concerned about. Where like this year, it doesn't matter to them. Like they can literally run him 30, 40 times a game, and they can run him into the ground, and it doesn't matter because they don't have him signed through next year. So if he tears his ACL or if he blows a knee or whatever it may be, then they're not going to be out that money next year. So it sounds cold, but the NFL is a business, and if they are signing him to a long-term contract, they're going to have health in mind. And so I don't think he sees the amount of work next year if he returns to Vegas.
Yeah, we talked about this the other night with Chris Seibel and Billy Wazowski, and they were a little bit more bullish on him as like a late second rounder just because of the potential volume. There is a lot of red flags. I think that you bring up the most interesting point you brought up was if they commit to him with a contract, they're not going to treat him the same.
Correct.
Which is kind of like a almost like a contradiction. Like we're paying you because you proved it, but now we want to have a little more return on our asset.
Correct.
You could see another back being added in there. Maybe Zamir White was never the guy because he certainly couldn't crack into anything. I anticipated a lot more from Zamir White. You just didn't see it. Amir Abdullah, was interesting, but those two guys could easily be replaced with a more capable backup. This year, there's a ton of running backs that are going to get drafted on day 2. There's one that's going to get drafted on day 1, but there's a lot that are going to get drafted on day 2. There's also a massive free agent market, which could make some starters into backups. So I do think there's some red flags there. I would tend to agree with you. I think he's going to be a 1-2 turn guy on like early drafts. I wouldn't touch him there. I would feel a lot more comfortable if he was a 3rd rounder. I know that's just not going to happen, so I'm probably out as well. It reminds me a little bit of Debo last year, where it was kind of like a perfect storm in terms of what happened.
Exactly.
And he gets overrated by the market, kind of an easy fade. Derrick Henry, similar situation, a lot more red flags in terms of age. He's going to turn 29. He'll be 29 to start the season next year. He's up to some absurd amount of carries right now for his career, but he has bounced back from injury to have this phenomenal season. Where would you have Derrick Henry next year? I think he was a guy that was faded by a lot of sharp players this year, and he's definitely it's been sort of a sharp squeeze on Henry stock this year. Where will you be on him next year? Do you think he's going to have a little more value if he falls slightly because of his age?
Yeah, I still think that he'll continue to be in that 1-2 turn, probably more into the 2nd round next year, just because he's had some up and down campaigns this year. He's got a lot of tread on tires. You hit that right. To date, 1,697 carries in his career in the NFL. He's a big man though, so he can take the beating. But the age cliff is fast approaching. I will still pass on him at the round 1-2. I typically go towards more of the pass catching backs, and I know that he took on a little bit more of that role this year. I just don't think he does it enough to really crack inside of a PPR back for me, and what I consider a PPR back. And then I will continue to probably lean on wide receivers early and often.
Yeah, me as well. I just think I'll be less apt to kind of auto fade Henry. I do think that like a year older, as crazy as it sounds, I do think he might fall again in high stakes. I don't want to be without any Derrick Henry next year. I think he's kind of proved that he's a mold breaker, and regression doesn't seem to affect him nearly as much. I also think that it will be interesting next year if it's a Malik Willis team, if he's able to take over the QB1 spot, how that would affect Henry to be next to a Russian QB. So that's just that certainly might not happen.
Yeah, and I want to clarify for people, when I say I fade an individual, I'm not drafting them, right? I will draft them if a value presents itself, because there's always a point in a draft in which someone is draftable. I mean, look at the Hardway draft where Austin, I think, got him at like the 2-9, right?
Yeah, Austin fell on that grenade for everyone, and he ended up doing great with it.
Yeah, so like in that aspect, like that's fine. Like I would take him there, of course, right? That's a discount. Do I want to pay premium for him every time he's on the board? No, I don't. So I think that you approach drafts, with an open mind and a fluidity to where you're able to adjust on the fly. And if a value presents itself, that's when you want to scoop up the value and draft a player that you are quote unquote fading, because now you've exposed yourself to a different ADP and you might have an advantage on the field.
Yeah, don't hate the player, hate the ADP. And I think that Chad Schroeder has been kind of famous for this over the years. He doesn't have a fade list, and he said he's be willing to draft a guy. There's no guy that he's crossing off if they fall to a certain extent. And I think that to a certain extent, I try to draft that way. I think that you're better off being willing to take one of these guys with at a sizable discount, especially when you're playing in tournament play. And I might have a guy, 12 spots lower than consensus. That can make a big difference. I want to give a quick shout out to the chat. The chat is lit right now. I did not do a great job of getting to any questions, but Jessel Jones, Jose Pena, Harry Snowman, 1912, Toronto Dave, Jack Colsheen. We have a lot of people in the chat. Hope you guys are Joe Carlton. Hope you guys are having a happy holidays season, and really appreciate you turning in for this daytime show. Shout out to Kevin Wheeler. Maybe if we have time, we'll get to a couple questions later. Want to keep this going. Cooper Kupp. This year, you were famously on Stephon Diggs ahead of Kupp. That's proven to be absolutely correct. You can take a lap whether the injury or not. Stephon Diggs has been a tremendous pick. Next year, Cooper Kupp is super interesting to me. He averaged 22 points per game this year before injury. Last year, he had the 26-point per game season. But we have tremendous red flags now with the Los Angeles Rams. We don't know what's going on with Matthew Stafford. We don't know what's necessarily going on with Sean McVay. I think there's been some rumors he could take off. The team could be in a tailspin in terms of overall talent. I think you're already seeing it this year. And Kupp will also be a year older and coming off of an injury. Where do you anticipate Cooper Kupp settling in, and where will you be on Cooper Kupp?
I still think Cooper Kupp will be in the first round. Stafford already said he's going to return. He stated it on his wife's podcast. So that there's at least that
and also
piece.
Time out. Billy is the second person. Chris Eibel also listens to the Kelly Stafford podcast.
Oh, I don't listen to it. I just saw a news clip on it.
Okay. I was going to say, Chris Eibel, for the record, listens to the podcast. The guy goes deep into the weeds.
No, it was like a blurb on that Stafford mentioned that he was not going to retire on her podcast. So I saw that and I was like, oh, that's good news for Kupp. That being said, I don't think McVay's gone next year. I think he's got one more year in him. If the team has another down year, I could see him leaving. But, that's what happens when you say F them picks and you trade away all your draft picks inside the NFL. It may work from a fantasy perspective.
You got the Super Bowl. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like a dynasty team that sells off all their future assets, but they get the money that year.
Yep.
That kind of goodwill will play with the fan base for a few years.
Yeah, it's gonna be a rough couple of years, but if they're able to hit on some late picks, they can make it up, and they can still spend money in free agency as long as they have it. And then I think that they still have some pieces. It's the offensive line, of course, that's the largest concern. And we saw that with the running game, with the passing game, it affected the entire offense. That being said, they'll probably be playing from behind. They'll throw the ball, so I still think Cooper Kupp is going to be heavily involved and still be a top-tier wide receiver. And you look at this injury, and it's not like he tore an ACL where it's going to take him months of recovery, and it's going to affect his ability to cut. So I think that this injury in particular isn't going to drastically affect his stock in 2023.
As a sneak preview, did he make your top 12?
Yes, he will be in the top 12.
He's in mine as well, just barely. The other night I kept him out of the top 12, and then I had a little buyer's remorse from that one. I'm sliding him in. So I'll just give you a head-to-head. Would you rather have Amon-Ra St. Brown or Cooper Kupp next year?
Cooper Kupp.
Would you rather have CeeDee Lamb or Cooper Kupp?
Cooper Kupp.
Okay, so he's right about that area. Devontae Adams or Cooper Kupp?
Devontae Adams.
Okay, so we're kind of seeing where not to ruin your top 12 coming up here.
But it does depend who's the quarterback in Vegas. If
the quarterback is Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, I'd probably be out.
Yeah, I don't want him in that first round. Quick shout out to Joe Carlton, also in the chat, and Ray Chung. A lot of high stakes players are tuning in for this one, and we appreciate you guys doing that. Pivoting over to the tight end position, with the question we asked the other night to Chris Eibel and Billy Wazowski, and then Dan and I also took part in this. It's not on the show sheet, but who will be your tight end 2 next year? Mark Andrews was tight end 1 or tight end 2 in every draft this year, and it's been a sizable gap now between him and Travis Kelce. Kelce's at about 20 points a game, slightly lower because lately he hasn't been crushing, but he's like 19.9. Andrews is 13-something. It's a huge gap. But does Andrews remain your tight end 2 drafted next year?
Yeah, I still think it's Andrews. You look at the games with Lamar Jackson, and he's significantly better when they had health and when they also had another receiver to pull some of that coverage. I think them losing Bateman was a big loss for this offense. overall, I still think Andrews is easily the number 2. I'll gladly take the discount next year because I think we're going to see a discount. But I think Hawkinson is probably in the discussion as well, just based upon the volume that he's seen and his snap shares, his target counts from coming to Minnesota. I mean, from day one, he ran like 90% snaps, which is phenomenal. So I think that we're going to continue to see Hawkinson climb ADP boards as well. I would not be surprised to see him kind of in that Waller range that he was going this year, that like round 3, maybe slipping around 4 on some drafts. But I would expect to see Hawkinson pretty high as well.
Yeah, Hawkinson's interesting because he'll be acclimated with the team more. Kevin O'Connell in the offseason. I'm sure we're going to have Justin Jefferson 101. And then there's a chance that Adam Thielen's gone. So I think it could be if KJ Osborne's operating as the number 2 wide receiver, I think him and Hawkinson could have similar target shares, if not Hawkinson with a higher one.
I'd say Hawkinson higher.
So I think that that's a nice call with Hawkinson, still young. For me, Mark Andrews remains tight end 2, but I think that it could be like a closer second tier, where it's Andrews kind of closer to like tight end 3. I also am interested to see, we talk about like recency bias, but I do think if George Kittle rips off a few, 20-point type games with Deebo Samuel out, I think he could have a little bit of juice heading into next offseason. Where are you at on Kittle?
They just underutilized Kittle, and I love my 49ers, but it pisses me off how they don't utilize George Kittle, who I think is probably hands down the number 1 tight end in terms of talent from an all-around standpoint, not from fantasy perspective, but from just an NFL tight end standpoint. I mean, blocking, route running, you name it, he can do it, and I just think that they use him too much in line as a blocker, even though he's phenomenal at it. The only time they seem to really have him that involved in the game plan is when they are out weapons like Deebo or and it's infuriating because I think he has the ability to be the tight end 1 in fantasy if they were to commit to him, but they just don't. So that being said, we don't know who's going to be the quarterback next year. If Purdy takes his team to a Super Bowl, I'm going to say he's the starting quarterback next year over Lance. Because the kid looks good. I mean, his footwork has surprised me. He's going through his progressions. He's getting to his 3rd and his 4th read in games. He's shown the ability to scramble and extend plays, which Deebo Samuel. I'm not Deebo, but Jimmy Garoppolo would have been sacked during those times, or he maybe leaned on Deebo so much that he definitely looked better than he was, where I think Purdy moves the ball down the field a little bit more. He's a game manager. It kind of reminds me of I hate to say it, but it kind of reminds me of a young Tom Brady in terms of how he holds himself and how he moves the ball down the field and just comes in and executes. He's not super flashy. He's not out here, throwing Mahomes passes 50 yards down the field and dimes, but he does enough to move the chains. He's in a system quarterback situation to where all he needs to do is get his playmakers the ball. And I think if he's able to continue to do that, I think he's a starting quarterback next year, which I think bodes well for Kittle because it seems to be that he looks Kittle's way a little bit more than Jimmy Garoppolo did or Trey Lance did in his one short start. So it's tough to say with George Kittle because there's so many variables. But I'm going to say he probably stays where he was last year, kind of that he was that tier 2 for me, maybe even top of tier 3 in tight end rankings. He was kind of on an island in his own regard, I think, and I think that's probably where he stays again.
I would agree with a lot of that. I think if they get to the Super Bowl with Purdy, I think they absolutely have to go with him. And I do think that just the way he plays, it would almost be a fantasy benefit for Deebo, Kittle, and certainly Christian McCaffrey on the dump offs. Trey Lance would be a quarterback you'd be interested in drafting higher, obviously, than Purdy, but I don't think it really elevates any 49er except for Brandon Ayuk. So it would be better for fantasy-wise in terms of you're holding 49er shares for it to be a Brock Purdy, in my opinion, as crazy as it sounds. What a meteoric rise for the kid. Just to be a 7th rounder to just make the team, let alone start games, is just wild. I I did not anticipate him playing this well. I'll take the L on that. And yeah, I think that they're definitely alive in the playoffs with Purdy under center. One other tight end I want to get your opinion on is Kyle Pitts, who had, I mean, we don't even need to talk about how high he went this year. It's a depressing thing, but especially for our FFPC listeners, you know, we saw Kyle Pitts in August and September being drafted in the end of the first round. He lived in the second round all summer long. I know Dave Hubbard was accurate when he, you know, said he was fading Pitts this year. A couple players took that that position, but I know a lot of some of the sharpest players that I know in high stakes were certainly taking Pitts. How do you anticipate the market is going to react to Kyle Pitts next year, where he ends up kind of in the tight end pecking order, let alone of what round he's drafted in? Like, what tight end position do you see him settling in at?
I still think people will overdraft him. I think next year he probably has his best opportunity to give fantasy managers a return on their investment. I didn't like Mariota for him just because Mariota runs the ball and doesn't throw the ball that well, where Ritter, in my opinion, will throw the ball a little bit more. And I think that we saw that last week with London right off the bat. So I think that you throw in Pitts in the mix, and I think that Ritter will probably get him the ball a bit more frequently than Mariota. I think a lot of it will come down to this offense, the coaching, and what they're going to do moving forward, what they're going to change inside of their playbooks, and are they going to continue down the same path, or are they going to make adjustments? Again, that's all off-season discussion. When I say variables that will affect ADP in the off-season, that's one of them, and I think that that's something that Atlanta will have to take a hard look at, because what they did this year clearly didn't work, and they're going to have to make some adjustments next year. I think that Pitt's probably in the same range as Kittle, quite frankly, which
tight
would
end
be
5-ish.
Yeah, 5, 6-ish, which will probably be, in my opinion, about the right spot for ADP. Talent-wise, it shows that he has the ability to outbeat it. Situation is the concern, and it's kind of that same question mark that Kittle has. Like, they both have the ability to be a top 2, top 3 tight end, but is the usage going to be there? And I think that those are the questions that will leave them in drafts a little bit lower than they potentially should be.
So certainly like ahead of like the Pat Freiermuth tier, but below, you know, Andrews, Hawkinson, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I think Kelce is probably in his own tier. I think that you have Andrews will kind of be a hybrid tier between him and Hawkinson. You could possibly throw Hawkinson in that same tier. And then from there, you'll see probably Kittle, maybe Waller in that same tier again, depending upon what he does here down the stretch and the usage that they have. And then probably Pitts in the tier below that, quite frankly.
So for moving on, just one general question in terms of ADP is, we've discussed this with a number of high stakes players over the last couple months, is where do we anticipate the high-end QBs being drafted next year? I think we could be headed towards a return to earlier QB, especially for the elite assets. We saw the win rates for teams with Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts this year. I mean, it was almost as easy as draft one of those guys, and you have a chance of at least finishing in as a team that's got a chance to dance in something like the FFPC main event. Where do you anticipate Mahomes and Allen will go? And then maybe we could touch on Hurts.
I think it'll vary by format, of course.
NFFC, I'll say NFFC, which is 6-point passing touchdown. Chris, Billy, Dan, and I kind of agreed that we think we'll see them in the second round.
You probably see him in a few drafts in the second. I think that's probably a little rich based upon the positional players that you'll be able to get. I think the third round will probably be a little bit more frequent and probably locked into the fourth. I think whether it's NFFC, FFPC, or FFWC, I do think we'll see a rise in ADP from all of the high-end quarterbacks, where like Josh Allen was, going early last year in round 4, usually in round 5 he was locked. Sometimes you saw him go in round 3 if people were building stacks. But I think round 3 is probably more realistic this next year for the Allens and the Hurts. But I think that when I say it varies by format, I think it'll definitely vary by best ball. Best ball, I could see 2 and 3 being the situation. Redraft, I think 3 is more likely, and possibly into 4, just depending upon how the draft falls.
It'll be an interesting one when we have these early drafts. I'm sure we're going to be drafting the hard way best ball shortly to see kind of like where these QBs go. That'll be something that we talked about, and then also kind of where the next group of quarterbacks gets dragged up to. Is there a sizable gap in ADP, or do you see like guys getting drafted kind of artificially higher, like we've seen with the tight end position? It's definitely something to look at in the offseason. Quick question from the chat before we get to the rankings. This person is named ETN, Science, and Many Things. So I'm guessing he likes Travis Etienne.
And science.
And he loves science. Do any of these wide receivers, should be starting over Rashad White and A.J. Dillon in the flex? Marquise Goodwin, Chris Moore, Rashid Shaheed.
I think that we need to see some more information on Olave before we can make up this call. If Olave and Landry are out, I think Rashid Shaheed is the start. Yeah,
I have him in a few leagues. I added him in a bunch of we still have dynasty waivers going, and I added him in a bunch of dynasty leagues. He could have a big role this week because he led the team in routes run last week. He had a touchdown over 90 yards, and if Olave misses, I mean they pretty much stopped using Landry to the extent they were weeks ago. So it could be a lot of it could be Shaheed's season as well as the holiday season this weekend.
Yeah, we saw him go for the big touchdown. He's like the perfect best ball candidate next year. I'm going to own so much of him. I already know. And he just fits the mold. He has the speed. He's on a team that's going to throw the ball, probably be trailing. There's a lot of reasons to like Rashid Shaheed next year for best ball.
And Billy, can we say unequivocally that he's the best Weber State player ever in the NFL?
I don't think I know another Weber State player.
There you go. Shout out to Damian Lillard and Rashid Shaheed. That's the two big Weber State guys. So we're actually at 50, almost 50 minutes in here. So why don't we just do FFPC top 12?
Okay.
We prepared too. So we could maybe add at the end of it. You could add a couple guys who might crack your if it was FFWC or NFFC guys you might push up. If you want to add those, cool. Why don't we start with 12 and just go back and forth? Who is your 12th ranked guy?
12th ranked player at FFPC is going to be I was expecting to start at 1.
Well, we can go 1. It's a little anticlimactic to be 12th last and our but we can do it. Let's do it comfortably. So I'll start at 1.
Okay.
My first guy is easy. It's Justin Jefferson.
Justin Jefferson, hands down, the consensus 101.
Okay, my 2 in FFPC is Stephon Diggs. I have him going 102. He's my wide receiver 2.
Okay, I'm going to go Christian McCaffrey 102.
Okay. Number 3 for me will be Travis Kelce. The tight end premium format pushes him way up. I think there'll be a huge gap at tight end. I want to make sure I walk away with some Travis Kelce. So for me, he's going to be 3.
Yep, I like Kelce at 3 as well.
Okay. 4 for me is Tyreek Hill. Had a smash season. I love what they're doing in Miami. It's going to be hard for me to see him falling out of the top 5.
Yeah, I have Jamar Chase at 4, but Tyreek is 5.
Okay, and then I have Christian McCaffrey at 5.
Okay, so we're very similar.
Yep. And then who'd you say was your 5 again?
5 is Hill for me. Yep.
Okay, so just to clarify, we're pretty similar in the top 5. For me, number 6 is Jamar Chase. He falls right below the Hill Diggs group, just because the presence of T. Higgins.
Yep. And I have Diggs at 6, so we just have a couple swapped.
Okay. 7 for me is Austin Eckler. He could have been higher, but I think this seems about right for him.
Yep. Eckler for me is 7 as well.
8 for me is Devontae Adams. I anticipate year 2 in Las Vegas. I think he's going to have another big season despite being a year older.
For me, it's going to be Barkley.
Okay. I have Barkley, but I had him a little bit lower, so we're still pretty close. 9 for me is A.J. Brown. He's up to almost 18 points per game. It'll be year 2 with him in Philly. It was hard for me to put him above some of the other wide receivers because I don't think he'll get the overall amount of targets, but he's already shown that he can be a near 20-point per game guy. So I have him at number 9 overall.
And I have Devontae Adams at 9.
Okay, so we're pretty close here. 10 for me was Saquon Barkley. He's my RB3, and I think he'll be a New York Giant again next year. I feel pretty confident that that'll happen. So I feel pretty good about him being inside my top 10.
10 for me is going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Okay. And then I had at 11 Cooper Kupp. I didn't want to put him in there, but I'm going to do Cooper Kupp with an asterisk. But if it's Baker Mayfield, he won't be in my top 15.
Yeah, I misread my sheet. Sorry. I had Cooper Kupp and then Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Okay. And then I had Amon-Ra St. Brown at 12.
Okay. And 12, I have Andrews again.
Okay, so you do have Andrews sneaking in there.
Yeah, I don't think he'll be locked there, but I think that he's going to go in that 1-2 turn still. I think a lot of it's going to depend upon Lamar Jackson, what happens at quarterback there. But if Jackson's back and everything's happy in Baltimore, I think Andrews will remain a top 12 pick.
And then the player that I considered putting into my top 12 that I seem to be higher on than other people right now is CeeDee Lamb. He's 16.5 points per game right now. He didn't quite have the smash season we wanted from him, but I think that the target share has been there, and I believe in the talent. And I don't know if he's a guy who could get you up to I don't think a 25-point per game season is in his wheelhouse like a Jefferson, but I do feel safe that he'll be like an 18-point-a-game guy next year.
Yeah, for me, the fringe player would have been A.J. Brown. I think another fringe player you could possibly discuss would be someone who's going to be interesting, and I'm really curious to see where ADP lands next year. I know it's not on the show sheet, but it's Tony Pollard.
Yeah.
I could see him shooting up boards going in the round 2, going in round 3, kind of like the Travis Etienne ADP of last year, anywhere from 2 to 4 kind of range. I think that people are going to be really high on Tony Pollard next year, seeing what he's been able to do with a larger role.
Yeah, the Chris Ebel brought him up as could be potentially his RB1 overall if Zeke is gone next year. So I think there'll be some. It'll be super interesting to see kind of what happens there. But we've seen his smash games are, they're legendary at this point. So he's super interesting to me. And then in terms of kind of another guy that I'm interested to see kind of where he ends up would be Jalen Waddle. Who I think will he's not going to be in the first round, but I do think he'll end up around like pick 18. I think the market will be pretty bullish on him. Yeah,
and I think Jacobs probably falls into that, like I said, 11 to 2.2 range as well. And another interesting one that it's going to be off-season news to report, but it's going to be Ramondre Stevenson because we expect Harris to be gone, and if Stevenson maintains the role that he has had during the absence of Damian Harris, one could argue that he should be an early round 2 pick as well.
Quick defensive question in the chat before we get out of here. What defense would you guys go with? The Jaguars, the Commanders, the Browns, or the Rams? I think it's low-hanging fruit. For me, it's the Cleveland Browns. We've seen them have 2 smash games out of their last 3. They had the 30-pointer against Houston. Last week, they held Baltimore to 3 points. And this week, they play the Saints. And the Saints have averaged 12 points a game their last 3. So I think that's it. It's an easy game sometimes. Is there another defense you'd go with over the Cleveland Browns this week, Billy? Or is that
no? I think the Browns, the chalk play.
Chalk play, guys. Go with it. Billy, I really appreciate your time. You're going on with Jody what night?
It'll be tonight at 4 o'clock my time, so 7 o'clock Eastern, and we'll be talking running back rankings, wide receiver rankings, and we'll do a couple tight ends tonight.
And Billy, you're 8th overall right now in the rankings for the season.
2nd, actually.
Where did I see this one? Okay,
I was 8th. I was 7th for the week last week.
It was the week. Okay,
yes.
So Billy right now is 2nd. Guys, take a step back and think about that for a second. Billy last year was number 1, and right now is number 2. So this is 2 years of running pure as a ranker, and no one else that's ranking has as much high stakes success as Billy. So he's crushing it on many levels. When are your rankings going up, Billy, for people to find them?
You talking like for redraft next year or for the weekly rankings?
The weekly
rankings are on Full Time Fantasy. They get posted Thursday morning. Like I said, Thursday I only do the Thursday night game and tweak players, and then I come through tomorrow. I'll have to do the major run because we have a day early this week. So tomorrow I'll go through and really hit the rankings and move players around. I hate to say it, but I don't post them live to Fantasy Pros, and then that updates the widget to the site until like right before kickoff, because unfortunately people do copy rankings, and they'll move their rankings depending upon where other players have them ranked. So I don't like to give people, the answers to my test per se. And I don't post them until like the last 3 minutes. So I'll do like a preliminary upload, and then I have like 5 or 10 players that I have in spots that I know they're not going to be there once I actually final post. And then I move those 5 to 10 players, and it significantly affects the rest of the ADP. So that's why I always tell people, reach out to me on Discord, because it's not fully accurate until right before kickoff.
It's a cutthroat business, the stealing of rankings, guys. You gotta watch out for piracy in the rankings game, guys.
It's part of the game, man. People look at it and they say,
100%.
"Oh, ECR is here. I'm going to move him here."
I mean, you see copycat drafts too, all the time in the you'll start seeing a football guys, and then Dave Hubbard will post a football. You'll see a football guys that Abib or Dave did, and then you'll see a couple very, very similar ones. So lot of copycats in fantasy football, but it's awesome. Billy, good luck to you. We hope you finish number 1 in the rankings.
2 weeks.
Unbelievable job you're doing, and I hope your teams run pure and you cash a lot of tickets. We have 2 more weeks. I hope everybody tuning in, your teams do great. Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year's, Happy Holidays, everybody. Really appreciate you tuning in. Billy, thanks again for your time.
Thanks for having me, Theo. Happy holidays, everybody.
Take care.